You've probably seen those haunting photos of Sherman tanks burning in the middle of World War II battlefields. And you've likely heard the rumors that these tanks would explode instantly, trapping their crews inside. But today, you're going to understand what actually happened to the men inside a Sherman when it got hit, and why the truth is even more disturbing than the myths. To understand the horror Sherman crews faced, we need to rewind a bit. After World War I, American tank development practically went into sleep mode. By the time 1939 arrived, the US Army had a collection of light tanks that were barely worthy of the name, thinly armored, lightly armed, and outdated before they even reached the field. Meanwhile, the Germans were doing the opposite, building, refining, training, and perfecting armored warfare. And when the war erupted, their blitzkrieg proved exactly how far ahead they were. By the time North Africa became the major battleground, America rushed to catch up. The result? The strange and awkward M3 Lee, a tank so compromised that it had its main 75mm gun stuck in a fixed-side casement because they didn't yet have the technology to produce a proper turret for it. It looked weird because it was weird. But the M3 was only meant to buy time until something better arrived. That something better became the M4 Sherman. Designed in 1941 under massive pressure, the Sherman borrowed the Lee's reliable chassis and replaced the riveted armor with welded plates, a life-saving improvement since rivets in older tanks would shear off and turn into lethal shrapnel inside the crew compartment during hits. The Sherman carried a 75mm gun, good for infantry support, decent against early German tanks, and reliable in almost every terrain. But nothing about its design prepared its crews for what they were about to face. The first Shermans in combat actually went to the British during the Second Battle of El Alamein. They loved its reliability, something their own tanks desperately lacked. The Sherman's gun performed well early on, and its armor was an upgrade over the British cruisers. But soon, the first serious problem became impossible to ignore.
The Sherman burned. A lot. If you've heard the nickname Tommy Cooker, that's where it came from. And the cause wasn't the gasoline engine, despite the myths. It was the ammunition. Early Shermans stored their shells in exposed racks along the side of the hull, the exact spot most likely to be hit. One spark, one fragment, one superheated jet of metal entering the tank, and those shells cooked off like fireworks. Crews didn't stand a chance. Armor plates were welded on to protect the ammo, but they barely helped. And to make things worse, crews often crammed extra shells into every free corner, afraid of running out during a fight. A tank built to carry roughly 97 rounds sometimes carried 130 to 140. One hit in the wrong place meant a firestorm. Wet stowage eventually solved this, relocating the ammo to the floor and surrounding it with water glycol tanks. This reduced the chance of the Sherman catching fire from almost 80% down to around 15%. But for the crews fighting in 1942 and 1943, that fix came far too late. And then there were the hatches. Early Sherman hatches were painfully small. The driver and co-driver had narrow rectangles. The turret crew? Even worse. 3 men had to escape through a single, cramped, 2-piece hatch. Imagine flames, smoke, exploding ammo, and 3 panicking men trying to climb over each other to survive. One veteran loader described how a shot killed the gunner and commander instantly. Their bodies collapsed together, blocking the only escape route. As the tank filled with smoke, he tried to push them apart, screaming, choking, but he couldn't. Only by pure luck did he see a faint glow from the driver's hatch and crawl out through it, seconds before the fire reached the ammo. It's the kind of story you don't forget. In 1944, larger oval hatches and a dedicated loader's hatch were finally added. But again, too late for thousands. Now, what actually killed Sherman crews? It wasn't usually German Tiger tanks like movies suggest. The real killers were anti-tank guns, infantry weapons, and mines. German 50mm PaK-38s could penetrate early Shermans. Then came the 75mm PaK-40, the weapon Allied crews feared most. And of course, the dreaded 88mm gun, which could destroy a Sherman from outrageous distances. German shells were deadlier because many carried explosive fillers, break through the armor, and then explode inside the crew compartment. Infantry weapons like Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks were even more horrifying. These used shaped charges that produced a superheated jet of molten metal. When that jet pierced the armor, it sprayed fragments of red-hot steel throughout the interior. Crews didn't always die immediately, and that's all I need to say about that.
Mines caused another nightmare, often flipping tanks or trapping crews inside burning wrecks. There are photos and videos of Shermans tossed into the air by massive improvised explosives. Survivors describe hearing nothing but ringing as they crawled out alone, realizing no one else was coming. Now, here's something surprising. A U.S. Army study found that, on average, one Sherman crewman died per knocked-out tank. The Soviet T-34, by comparison, lost 2 per tank destroyed, even though it only had a 4-man crew. The Sherman had many flaws, but it was not a death trap on the statistical scale people often claim. Yet, numbers don't tell the whole story. Someone still had to open those burned-out wrecks afterward. Mechanics or the Graves registration teams were tasked with retrieving whatever remained inside. If the tank burned, the remains were often charred beyond recognition. If it hadn't burned, what was left was worse. They'd open the bottom escape hatch, flush the interior with water, clean out whatever they had to clean out, repaint the inside, weld the holes shut, and sometimes that same tank would return to battle within days. Crews who survived the destruction of their tank often formed new ad hoc teams and climbed right back into another Sherman, sometimes being knocked out multiple times in the same battle. When you read their accounts, a strange pattern appears. They didn't fear death as much as they feared burning alive, or being trapped, or hearing the screaming of friends they couldn't reach. The bravery of Sherman crews wasn't in driving a powerful machine. It was in climbing into a tank they knew could kill them just as easily as it protected them, and doing it again the next day anyway. And that's what really happened inside a Sherman after a hit. Not myths, not movie stories, just the brutal, terrifying reality of war and the courage of the men who faced it.